Aurangzeb, otherwise a very prejudiced fellow, when writing to his son says, Azam, that when you go to Daulatabad, don't forget to visit Ellora, because now even Urdu is lost. So he said, it is one of the Mazair Ilahi, that it is one of the great creations of God. So Ellora is, of course, a special part of our national heritage because it had been so regarded in the past as well. But I return to the structural part. Once you don't have the arch, once you don't have lime mortar or gypsum mortar to bond, you begin to build with stone. And you begin to build massive things by stone on the Trebiat principle. And this results in very heavy structures. Actually, I don't think it's a North Indian temple from Orissa, but anyway, that suffices for me to two things. I think these are two temples from Badami, but for my purpose they serve because you see, both are based on Trebiat principles. In that on the left, the walls go up until they meet at the top like this, and the shikhar therefore has to be taller and taller. This was identified by Ferguson as an Aryan or North Indian form of temple construction. The walls of the shikhar are ribbed. The other on the right is supposedly based on what he called the Dravidian principle, that is to say, they are terraced. They are also based on the Trebiat principle, but by forming terraces after terraces, till they become shorter and shorter and meet at the top. All South Indian temples are based on the principle of the right, even the largest and the greatest temples, built by, for instance, Cholas. And here came sculpture. Increasingly, it came to be the tradition that the entire face should be sculptured, and that you see in the Konark temple, for instance, 1250, one of the greatest of Indian monuments. But the whole question remains the relationship between style and lack of technology. You can see that when you can't build like Iranians and Byzantines, you will begin to have this particular, you have to go into the Trebiat style. And then it's almost that you lose all sense of control, and you just go on building larger and larger, heavier and heavier structures, and then in order to vary the dullness, you begin to have more and more sculptured surfaces. I wrote once that perhaps Indian architecture has the largest sculptured surfaces in the world. In Konark, it is almost taken to the extreme, but that is why it is such a tourist attraction today. So whatever the greatness of this art, the lack of technology behind it is astonishing. Now this brings me to medieval times. For ease, not because Islam as a religion has to do with anything like architecture. It's often called Islamic architecture. Previously, it was also called Saracenic. But this architecture actually arose from two influences, Byzantine and Iranian. And since Muslims are supposed to be very orthodox, I will begin with an anecdote. Muqaddisi, perhaps one of the greatest of Arab geographers, who also came to India, or rather Pakistan now, Sindh and Multan. His geographical account is wonderful. Writing in 10th century. He says, I asked my uncle, why Muslim rulers spent so much money in building mosques? After you can pray to God anywhere, God is present anywhere. Why build such mosques and waste money? They should have built, he said, bridges, karvasarais, border fortresses to stop raiders. That would have served people. But why mosques? The uncle answered that this was not because of their religious spirit, but because Christians had built such mosques, such churches, glorious churches, and so they felt bad, and therefore they copied the Christians and built large mosques. And actually the mosque is shaped initially after a church. If you go to the earlier mosque, the relationship is very clear, but that we in India have nothing to do because no early mosques survive in India. The so-called Islamic architecture we got was, however, the Byzantine influenced Arab architecture when it mixed with the Iranian architecture. And therefore, two civil engineering systems became one. The Iranians bonded bricks and stones with gypsum, which bonds by solidification. It solidifies immediately and so bonds. And lime, that is Byzantine, lime mortar, which acts slowly but bonds through chemical action. Now, the Byzantines emphasized the dome, the Iranians the vault. Both are actually developments of the arch. Arches in succession create vaults, and arches in circle create domes. So we received them. These are two very important developments. This development is very important for Indian architecture because technique of constructing domes on pendentives and the technique of constructing domes on squinches both arrived together under what now the historians of architecture call Muslim architecture. Now, if you see the Qubbatul Islam Mosque, you see the initial problem of the builders. They have now finished models of the so-called Islamic architecture. But the artisans and the local contractors, because I'm sure they also contracted out and there was much leakage lies. I mean, that's also very ancient. We know that from Kanishka's casket, how much this is the old good Indian tradition of making money. So, how to construct? So, as far as artisans were concerned, they were obviously mostly Hindus, and so probably contractors. They were not immigrants, they didn't know how to build it. But in time they learned. And although that can be illustrated from structures, for instance, there's the next Sultan Ghari. Yes, you can see in Sultan Ghari, Nasiruddin Mahmud's tomb, 1265, that still the Trabeat arch is there. This is much more clearly the Trabeat arch. You have almost cut out the arch from a wall. But then you come to Alai Darwaza, after that. This is, this one. Now here, the arch is the true arch, And the dome is also there. Alai Darwaza has the first surviving true dome. Previously, domes were also built on the Trebiat Peninsula. But we now know that Indian or Hindu engineers, to use the modern formula, they wouldn't probably at that time call themselves Hindus. Thakura Pheru, for example, was a mint official of the Khaljis. He writes in Jain Sanskrit, 1310. In a small passage, in a small section, he says, he gives formulas for calculating the amount of bricks you will need for a true arch, which he calls correctly tak or tak, and a dome, which he correctly calls gumbad, and for a bridge, arched bridge, which he calls pul. So he uses Persian terms in Sanskrit and gives formula for calculating the amount of bricks that would be needed for building domes, arches, and bridges of a particular size, of any size XYZ. This means that by 1310, even an official of a mint knew how these arcuate constructions were made. So clearly, Hindu artisans had become very familiar with these techniques. And the moment these techniques arrive, then you see a great lightness in architecture, which is witnessed all through. I needn't go on to that. The use of lime mortar and the use of gypsum mortar is very important. I forgot to say that why Indians never use lime mortar after 2nd century AD is really a sad comment on us, because Varahamihira tells us that to eat pan, lime is essential. 5th century AD. Now, in my student days, every student ate pan, and we knew that tuna and katha are necessary. But now I suppose the habit is less and less. But Al-Biruni says, India is where pan is eaten and the black gazelles graze. That is India. So, pan was important and lime was already a component, but we made use of it as a plaster, as putting it on statues somehow to whiten it, but not as mortar. And this is one of the surprising failures of Indian technology. Anyway, let me return to the fact that architecture now has a totally new beginning, a new shape and form. All these have given us great monuments. It is true that the skill and techniques diffuse slowly. Even in Vijayanagar, where true arch appears, lime mortar remained unknown. The Portuguese, when they suggested lime mortar to Krishnaraya, the Vijayanagar emperor, the emperor did not believe them. One particular element, 2 or 3 elements of the national heritage. See, when you take medieval monuments, it's very important what people think of them. And there was a 4,000-page judgment by Justice Agarwal of the Allahabad High Court, in which he said that for very much like any RSS man, that for 800 years, Muslim rulers dominated the country and sent its wealth abroad. dominated the country is all right. I mean, whether Hindu rulers looted the people or Muslim rulers looted the people, nobody can disagree. They looted. But sent abroad, it seems Agarwal never saw, Justice Agarwal never saw Taj Mahal, Humayun's tomb, Fatehpur Sikri. You know, one of the charges modern historians make on Shah Jahan and the decline and his role in the decline of the Mughal Empire is that he overspent on the Taj. 50 lakhs of rupees was a big sum at that time. All their constructions are in India. And so a part of the national heritage. Organizer from time to time used to publish articles that Red Fort was built by Chauhan Rajas, Delhi, and Taj Mahal was Man Singh's palace, and so forth. And they used to print it. And one of the historians whom I admire, R.C. Majumdar, used to write for organizer. When after they wrote that Shah Jahan did not build the Taj Mahal at all, R.C. Majumdar wrote to them that you don't print such nonsense. Organizer said that we are people who believe in liberty. And of course, they wouldn't open their page to a Muslim fanatic, but then they don't believe in liberty. Then they don't believe in liberty, but they said we believe in liberty. So Majumdar wrote back, and I must say for organizer that they printed that letter, that you are welcome to your liberty, I am welcome to mine, I will never write in your paper again. This is R.C. Majumdar. So, national heritage is also formed by the rulers. Taj Mahal is as much a part of our national heritage. Of course, it's the major tourist attraction in India today, as Konark or any other building. So this has particularly to be praised, that whether it's a mosque, whether it's a tomb, whether it's a bridge, whether it's an inn, they are all parts of our national assets. Here I'll only make to one point that we know today, we call the tribute architecture Hindu and the arcuate architecture Muslim, but this was not what Akbar and others thought. They never thought, not being historians of architecture, that a true arch is Muslim and a tribute arch is Hindu. And if you can see it, you can see it best in Fatehpur Sikri. I suppose Nadeem must have spoken about it. That much of Fatehpur Sikri is an experimentation in tribute architecture. Unlike ancient tribute architecture, Fatehpur Sikri still manages to be light. Light pillars, light beams, light roofs, because of, I think, more serious mathematical calculations. And therefore, for instance, for Hawa Mahal is totally tribute, and yet it's so light. There's nothing compared to that in ancient Indian architecture based on tribute architecture, though both are based on the same techniques. So here there is also an element of experimentation, technological experimentation. There are also ideological aspects which sometimes we miss. In many books on architecture, I have not seen it noted that Akbar, while building his tomb in Sikandra, did not use the dome. It is undomed. Although by that time it was recognized that any tomb worth the name must have a dome. They are not domed. It is also likely that he left Fatehpur Sikri because it was over-dominated by the mosque. I think it's now fairly clear that that was the reason, because the old reason that a dam broke has been proved to be wrong. A'tamad-ud-Daula's tomb is without a dome, Jahangir's time, one of the great Mughal buildings. And Jahangir's tomb itself in Lahore is without a dome. And Jahangir says, it was said that he had willed that my grave should be open to the skies and the winds, but there is no dome. Is there some assertion of, what shall I say, defiance of orthodoxy in this particular tendency? It's a thought that comes to one. And therefore, religion is also involved in this architecture, but not in the ways that has been thought when Akbar played with architecture in Fatehpur Sikri. He didn't know that Tibetan architecture. He didn't know that Tibetan architecture was Hindu, nor did his critics. They never criticized him for constructing buildings in the Hindu fashion. I now come to another final point that strikes me. Perhaps, I hope it's final and I won't go on. Do these monuments have some message for us there? Well, a man called, I forget his name, one of the assistants of Alexander Cunningham, who did so much to preserve Indian monuments, Garrick, HBW Garrick, was sent by Cunningham to Chittor. He there examined the Jayastham or Vijayastham, the famous tower. And while describing it, he found that while in the lower main stories, all the deities had their statues, Hindu deities. At the top, the word Allah was carved 17 times, all around, 17 times, in Arabic characters. Now, Garrick then notes that was India different at that time? Now, this is, of course, a thought. Were we different? I'm not a believer, but what Kumbh's thumb struck Garrick with has been the case with me too. When I hear Gandhiji's version of Ram Dhun being sung, Ishwar Allah, Tero hi naam, sabko sammati de Bhagwan. Thank you.